Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Royal Family of Gondal, Ashish Doshi, Honorary Director, and myself, welcome to the Royal Opera House, Mumbai. My name is Asad Lalljee, and I'm privileged to be the curator of this iconic venue. For those unfamiliar, this magnificent building was inaugurated in 1911 by King George V, and after a hiatus of 25 years, was reopened in October of 2016. At the Royal Opera House, literature is considered one of our most important and robust segments of our curatorial vision. We constantly strive to bring newer perspectives, voices to this maximum city. Our stage has contributed to supporting literature in all its forms, with frequent and out-of-the-box programming. We regularly collaborate with literature festivals, publishing houses, authors, intellectuals, and thought leaders to give opportunities and experiences to the city which will long be remembered. We believe that the arts play an integral role in instrumenting social change, and we feel privileged to leverage our stage to support a wide range of issues and causes. Gender rights, diversity, parity, and inclusivity are key in fueling empowerment of women, and the Royal Opera House seeks to be a change maker in this respect, providing a platform for fearless and inspiring women to tell their stories, recount their trials and tribulations, and catalyze change. Along with supporting annual international remembrance days, such as the International Day of the Girl Child, we've also presented and supporting women who play a role in bringing about a paradigm shift in our society. Over the years, earlier this year, we premiered filmmaker Vibha Bakshi's powerful gender rights documentary, Sunrise, at this very venue, which we co-presented with UN Women. Since reopening 3 years back, we've championed influential female voices in the arts and culture from across the country and beyond. And tonight, we're honored to have yet another important voice on this very stage. But before we commence this very special and power-packed evening, and since you are sitting in India's only surviving opera house, let's begin with music. Please put your hands together and welcome two very talented young artists whose performance, I am sure, is going to set the tone for the rest of the evening. Take it away, girls, and set the stage on fire.
She's just a girl, but she's on fire. Hotter than a fantasy, lonely like a highway. She's living in a world and it's on fire. Feel the catastrophe, but she knows she can fly away. Oh, she got both feet on the ground and she's running it down. Oh, she got her head in the clouds. She's not backing down. This girl is on fire. This girl is on fire. She's walking on fire. This girl is on fire. Looks like a girl, but she's a flame. So bright she can burn your eyes. Better look the other way. You can try, but you'll never forget her name. She's on top of the world. Hottest of the hottest girls say, oh. She got her head in the clouds and she's not backing down. Oh, she got both feet on the ground and she's not backing down. This girl is on fire. This girl is on fire. She's walking on fire. This girl is on fire. Everybody stares as she goes by, 'cause they can see the flame that's in her eyes. Watch her she's lighting up the night. Nobody knows that she's a lonely girl. She's a lonely girl. And it's a lonely world. Don't let it burn, baby, burn, baby. This girl is on fire. This girl is on fire. She's walking on fire. This girl is on fire.
Thank you to these talented young artists, Karishma Modi and Shania Lalljee. I hope you are all fired up. It is so important that the next generation gets empowered and be unafraid to express themselves. A special thank you to Stephen Fernandez and the Sobo House of Music for this portion of the program. Tonight, we're honored to have with us none other than the creator of the Vagina Monologues, that the New York Times describes as probably the most important piece of political theater of the last decade. Akshara Centre, 1 Billion Rising, the Royal Opera House Mumbai, and Avid Learning present an evening of book readings, conversations around the global launch of best-selling author and award-winning playwright Eve Ensler's latest book, The Apology. Please welcome Dr. Nandita Shah and Dr. Nandita Gandhi, co-founders of Akshara Centre, to formally begin this evening's proceedings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, all of you, to have made it today and made this day a very special, some warm welcome to everyone. We co-founded Akshara, me, Nandita Shah, and my colleague Nandita Gandhi, 24 years ago, with the belief that lives of women need to change positively and that gender equality is a non-negotiable. It's an integral part of the women's movement. We have been engaged with various interventions nationally and internationally. Changing hearts and minds of individuals has been a very important first pillar of our work. And some glimpse of it we saw in this video, overcoming fear, reclaiming the public spaces, and basically helping girls to run for their dreams. As a small organizations, we have tried to be creative, bringing innovative tools and methods to impact large number of people. Gender games developed by Akshara are now being used all over India in 8 states, reaching out to thousands of young women and children. But end of the workshop, so many girls ask us, Didi, aap ladko ko kyun nahi kehte? And that's when our journey began of working with boys. And unless the boys recognize their own privilege and be part of the solution, our dream of another world would not be possible. And today, our work with young men and women has enrolled over 25,000 young gender champions and bringing changes in their own lives and in the lives of people around them. Our second pillar is changing society and having new conversations, and this kind of event is part of that process. We do this through various kinds of public engagement, film festivals, artist residencies, midnight run, and also an attempt to do competitions. The last one that we did was to invite people from all over the country to say, let's change the sexist lyrics in Bollywood. And all these campaigns has kind of reached out to over 30.5 million people. We believe that we can change conversation. But what about the system? Because that also needs to change along with us, and that brings us to our third pillar of work, that is working with the government. It's been 10 years that we initiated the 103 helpline with the Mumbai police after the 2 girls were molested outside of JW Marriott, and it's still running, and over 10 lakh calls have been received through it, and many women have been helped through it. Our work with BEST bus conductors and with Western and Central Railways has contributed to safety of women in the city. And most recently, with many women's organizations who are today present here, we have been able to bring a gender inclusion in the development plan of Mumbai, which is going to mean that for the next 20 years, in every ward, women are going to have new services and amenities brought and improved in their lives. So the Akshara approach is really to build synergy from grassroots to government, from classrooms to action, and from research to policy. But all these are just ripples. What really needs is a huge wave of change, and that's not possible unless each one of us is part of that process of change. And today is an invitation for all of you to join us and join the 1 Billion Rising, and just be part wherever you are to try and bring about that change. The next 2 hours is going to be a discussion on a path-breaking book with Eve and Faye. But it's going to be much more than that. It's going to be discussion on power, privilege, hurt, and healing. And we believe it's not going to be an easy conversation, but it's going to allow us to pause, to introspect, and to find out our own answers. Thank you very much. And now over to Nandita Gandhi.
So I've got one of the most pleasant tasks in the evening. I'll be introducing to you 3 fantastic human beings that are going to make this evening for you thought-provoking as well as memorable. It's our privilege to have with us in Mumbai, Eve Ensler. We've known Eve and been partners with her for many years. We traveled in bumpy roads, and we've met in other cities. We've inaugurated feminist retreats. We've been together, sisters in arms. For me, Eve is one of the few writers who can creatively politicize art. She can pick up an issue, she can personalize it in the most engaging way, and she can appeal to a wider audience. Best known as a writer of Vagina Monologues, she has written and performed 10 plays all over the world, and she's included 2 memoirs along with it. In between all this creativity, she found time to set up We Day, a global activist movement to stop violence against women and girls, which is being funded by the performances of vaginal monologues. In 2012, Eve initiated 1 Billion Rising, one of the largest international movements against violence. This evening will also feature Rahul Bose. We all know him as an actor, a mainstream actor, an art film actor, but he's also a director of 3 films. Everybody says, I'm fine, The Whisperers, and the most latest, The Purna. What sets him apart, though, is that he's a fine human being with a social conscience. Rahul has been a friend to Akshara for 2 decades, supporting and interacting with Basti girls, connecting us to people, events, and giving keynote speeches. He's always there when there is a disaster or there is a serious issue at hand. The Narmada agitation, tsunami, the Mumbai terror attacks. Rahul is also the founder of 2 NGOs, the Foundation, which provides education for children in need, especially in conflict areas, and HEAL, devoted to the prevention of child sexual abuse. His activism has yielded him several awards, like Indian Youth Icon of the Year, the Green Globe Award, services to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Hakim Khan Sur for National Integration, and GQ's Man of the Year 2015 and 17. He will be reading excerpts from Eve's book, and this will be followed by a discussion between Eve and Faye D'Souza. Now, who doesn't know Faye D'Souza? Anyone who watches TV knows her. In a short time since she graduated and joined the news media, She's become a journalist for the millenniums, young, fresh, and brutally honest. She spent her initial years in the world of business news with CNBC TV 18, where she was in the thick of things like state policies and economic offenses. She subsequently left them to join Times Network and went onward to become the executive editor of Mirror Now. She's an award-winning journalist whose signature style focuses on citizens and their issues. She picks up serious issues and makes them understandable and easy to grasp. Who can be better than her to engage in a conversation with Eve? And now to the main part of the evening, the readings.
These are some of the most wrenching, beautiful words that you'll ever hear. I hope I do justice to them. Thank you, Eve, for the force that you are. There'll be 6 readings. I'll just take a long pause between each of them. How very strange to be writing you. Am I writing to you from the grave, or the past, or the future? Am I writing as you, or as you would like me to be, or as I really am beneath my own limited understanding? And does it matter? Am I writing in a language I never spoke or understood, which you have created inside both of our minds to bridge the gaps, the failures to connect? Maybe I'm writing as I truly am, as you have freed me by your witness. Or I'm not writing this at all, but simply being used as a vehicle to fulfill your own needs and versions of things. You always wrote me letters. I found that peculiar and strangely moving. We lived in the same house, but you were writing to me. Your little girl handwriting, attempting straight lines, but wandering all over the page. It was as if you were trying to make contact with some aspect of me, a part you could not find in the heated moments of our conflict, as if you were trying through poetry to appeal to a secret self that I had once made available to you. Usually you wrote apology letters. So fitting that you would now want an apology letter from me. You were always apologizing, begging for forgiveness. I had reduced you to a daily degrading mantra of I'm sorry. This apology required time. It could not be rushed. Fortunately, I've had practice here, endlessly reliving and rehashing my crimes, mentally reenacting the details. I know you have said that an apology must be thorough and can only be trusted in its veracity and dedication to details. I have done my best. I have followed your very strict guidelines. Recognize what I have done as a crime. Face how deeply my actions and violations have impacted and devastated you. See you as a human being. Attempt to experience or feel what it felt like inside you. Feel profound remorse and regret over my actions. And finally, take responsibility for my actions by doing extensive work to understand what made me do what I did. I will need to go back in this letter to locate the roots of my behavior. I will be as honest as a formerly disingenuous person can be. I will attempt to proceed with neither defensiveness nor self-pity, as I understand neither will further clarify nor resolve. I would find myself in your room at some twilight hour. I only felt alive between the daylight and darkness, in that crepuscular realm where dream and memory are indecipherable. That's how I controlled you. Those aphotic hours where others in the house were lost in sleep and you were in a trance, separated from your body. I would find myself sitting on your bed, somehow carried there by shadow man. You would pretend to be asleep, as if what was happening was not happening. You desperately wanted it and me to go away. I didn't go away. I never spoke, never uttered a sound. The silence was my power. Words would break the spell, make it real and ugly, and what it was. What kind of bastard have I been? What kind of destruction have I wrought? I have lied. Lied to myself and you. I cursed your future of love. At 5, I took your body. You didn't give it to me. I contaminated your sweetness. I ripped the protective golden gates from your garden. I betrayed your trust. I rearranged your sexual chemistry and the basis of your desire. Wrongness and excitement were forever fused together. I made my stain. I left my stinking mark. I infected you. By invading and overwhelming your body, I killed your yearning so early. You did not and could not give me permission. There was no consent. You did not seduce me with your crinoline petticoats. You were simply being an adorable child. I overstimulated your 5-year-old body and planted the seeds of intensity and thrill. You would push yourself too far, take heroin, jump off bridges, drive 100 miles an hour. I robbed you of the ordinary. I destroyed your notion of family. I forced you to betray your mother. You lived in perpetual self-hatred and guilt. I created hierarchy, distrust, and violent competition between you and your siblings. None of you would recover from this. I robbed you of agency over your body. You didn't make any decisions. You didn't say yes. That was my projection in order to satisfy my needs. You were 5 years old. I was 52. You had no sovereignty. I exploited and abused you. I took your body. It was no longer yours. It rendered you passive. You compulsively gave it to whoever wanted it because I taught you should. I forced you out of your body, and because you were dislocated and numb, you were unable to protect yourself. I compromised your safety and ability to defend yourself. I made it so that rape became what turned you on. I eviscerated your necessary boundaries so you never knew what was yours and when to say no, or how to say stop. I tore the delicate walls of your vagina and made it vulnerable to disease and infection. Your body didn't and couldn't say yes. This was a convenient lie I told myself. You didn't know it was sex. I took what I needed by convincing myself you needed it too. I exploited your adoration. I forced you into secrecy, to lie to your mother, to develop a dual life. This split you in two. I made you feel like a whore. I made you feel like you were never worthy of legitimate love. I made intimacy claustrophobic. I left my poison in you. I destroyed your memory by making you want to forget everything. This impacted your intelligence and ability to contain facts and take tests. I stole your innocence. I dimmed your life force and made you feel your sexuality was the cause of bad things. I used your being and body to serve myself. I did all this. Eve, let me say these words. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Let me sit here at the final hour. Let me get it right this time. Let me be staggered by your tenderness. Let me risk fragility. Let me be rendered vulnerable. Let me be lost. Let me be still. Let me not occupy or oppress. Let me not conquer or destroy. Let me bathe in the rapture. Let me be the father. Let me be the father who mirrors your kind-heartedness back to you. Let me lay no claims. Let me bear witness and not invade. Eve, I free you from the covenant. I revoke the lie. I lift the curse. Old man, be gone. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Eve Ensler. Well, before we begin, we must take a moment to recover from Rahul's reading. Eve?
I just want to say that was such a beautiful reading, Rahul, and I want to just give him an incredible applause for that. It was so beautiful.
I'm here for a couple of reasons. First of all, I was promised that Eve would sign my book at the end of it. I don't know why you guys are here. Secondly, because I mean, the opportunity to be on this stage, in this room, which is so beautiful.
It's such a beautiful place. I was saying to her backstage, it's like a gilded vagina we're sitting in right now. It's gorgeous, just gorgeous.
Opportunity number 3 is to use the word vagina repeatedly in public, which you don't get to do on television. So I'm going to say it a lot. I read the book when it was sent to me, and I read it again last night. And it's important to give the audience context to Rahul's reading as well. This was an apology that you wrote, that you imagined your dead father ought to have given you, but he never did.
Yes, and I think as a child, from a very young age, my father sexually abused me from 5 to 10. And then after, when I finally began to resist, he became very, very violent for the next years of my life, almost murdering me a few times. And I think I always dreamed when I got older that my father would somehow wake up and see the wrongness of his deeds and apologize and have that moment where he would come and out of his kind of narcissistic belligerence and say, and see what he had done. And guess what? That didn't happen. And so 31 years have passed since my father died. And I would say, like, during that period, 25 of those years, I have fought with my life to end violence against all women and girls. And I think what I've seen in our movements, that women are so extraordinary. We've broken the silence, we've told our stories, we've risked humiliation and judgment and all kinds of degradation by coming forward. We've opened hotlines, we've opened shelters, we've created gender programs. I mean, particularly women in India who have just run such powerful movements here. Yet it occurred to me that in all this time, I have never heard a man publicly apologize for battery, harassment, or rape, or incest in all those years. And then I started to think, in 16,000 years of patriarchy, have we ever seen a public recorded apology from a man about one of those things? And I don't mean, I'm sorry I hurt you, or I'm sorry if you feel bad. I'm talking about an in-depth apology. And I realized the fact that there hasn't been any might be pretty central to why we're continuing on in this incredible war between men and women. So I decided I was going to write the apology I had never gotten, to say the words I needed to hear, to climb inside my father and to let my father inside me, and to really write and see what an apology would be, what would the architecture of an apology be, and what could a blueprint for other men might look like having written this.
It's interesting, and I'll go back to the details in the book, but we've seen so much of these apologies in the last 2 years since the Me Too movement started, and a lot of them sound like, if you think I might have done something that may not have been acceptable at the time, given the fact that you were drunk, you seemed like you wanted it, and if somehow you might think this is wrong, then maybe I'm sorry.
Exactly. Or they're framed in, I've read a couple where the whole thing is, look what's happened to my life since you spoke out about me. And look how my career has been ruined, look how this has been, but no admission of what has been done, and no feeling for what happened to the woman as a result of those actions.
Yes. And I think that, you know, Rahul's reading put it forward very beautifully, and you will all know when you read the book even further, the gaslighting that normally comes with abuse and rape, which is that you were asking for it, or it was some sort of consent, or it happened because of some of the other consequence or some situational reason. But the book actually, you've written out very beautifully how none of these things were excuses, how there was no consent from a 5-year-old. There was no sort of bodily response. This was all in the head of the abuser. And perhaps that's the most, you know, it's the thing we've never heard, where the apology comes with zero sort of justification.
Or condition, exactly. I think one of the things about writing this book, which for me was so both excruciating but also interesting, was I think when women are violated at a young age or any time, but particularly if it's a family member or someone they know well, the perpetrator actually gets inside you. They occupy you. And often you know that person better than you know yourself, particularly if you're afraid of that person, and particularly if that person is abusing you in a serial way constantly. And so you can tell by their footsteps, or you can hear the sound of their voice, you know what's going to happen. And often, as a child, because you love your parent or your uncle or your brother or whoever it is so much, you're actually feeling feelings that they don't feel, because often boys are brought up not to have their feelings. So what I discovered is how well I knew my father how well he lives inside me, because I had to know him so well in order to protect myself from him. And I think writing this book, there was a huge difference between explanation and justification. I wanted to really look at what happened to my father, what happened in his childhood, what happened in the beginnings of his life in a culture of patriarchy, growing up in a toxic, masculine world, what happened in his family, what were the conditions that created him to become the kind of monster he eventually became.
So was there at any point, even when you were writing this, did you feel that there may have been a risk of, am I sort of justifying this? Am I making excuses for him from his childhood for this sort of behavior?
Well, I think there was a real struggle all through it, not to justify, but to understand. But I also feel like we are at a place where we're kind of at each other now. We're at each other. But we're not going underneath the story. We're not going underneath what's happening between us. We're not looking at the impact, for example, of patriarchy and patriarchal families and what it does to boys, for example. And I think if we don't start getting to an understanding of what is happening to boys and what's happening to men and why they... I just don't believe boys are born monsters. I just don't believe anyone's born a rapist. I don't. I think things happen to people. And I think what I wanted to do in this book is to try to say why. I think survivors are often haunted by why. Haunted. You know, why would my very good friend drug me and rape me? Why would my father want to destroy his daughter? Why would my boss who hired me put his hand on my leg while I'm giving my biggest, presentation? Why? And I think going into that why is critical to transforming consciousness and finding our way out of the place we're in right now.
Was it also important for you to work your way out, and it might not have been through the book, it sounded like you had managed to do this a little earlier in your life, of a lot of the survivors of abuse and rape struggle with the idea not just of why, but did I do anything to bring this on? Did I attract the abuse? Did I do something? And, in India, we know that there's this whole idea of ek haath se tali nahi bajti, which is that you can't clap with one hand, so the girl must have done something to bring this on. Was there a portion of that you worked through in your adulthood?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think all children, all life forms, but particularly children because they're still so close to the divine, they haven't been severed from the divine quite yet, are so alive sexually because sexuality is our divine life force, right? And I think when somebody comes and perverts that life force or exploits that life force, you suddenly feel that which is most beautiful about you and pure about you and life-giving about you, it becomes corrupted, right? And you suddenly start feeling guilty for it and bad about it, right? And I think so much of my life, and I know this is true for so many survivors, we walk around thinking, what did I do to provoke this? How did I make this happen? Because also as a child, you need your parents. You don't want your father to be wrong. You don't want your father to be bad. He's the person who's taking care of you and supporting you and who you love. And so very often you take on all that guilt and all that self-hatred because you don't want to hate your father. You don't want to hate your parents. And I think writing this book, I actually got the blame back where it belonged. His responsibility was returned to him. And actually he was forced to take it because I got to write it.
You also, through the book, very interestingly, point out the role played by other family members, because you had siblings, your mother was around. While they might not have necessarily witnessed the sexual abuse, they did witness the physical abuse. Was there a healing process there as well?
There was very much a healing process with my mother. I think my mother was of the generation. And I think, sadly, this is still going on in many families all over the world, where my father had all the power, where my mother came from a poor family. My father had money and charm, and he had access to a whole new world. And, you know, it was my mother's way out of that economic situation. And by the time my father started manifesting this really frightening behavior, she had 3 kids. And what was she going to do with 3 children? She was economically dependent on my father. She didn't have a career. She didn't have a job. And when I eventually confronted my mother, which was very difficult, one of the hardest things I've ever done, a few months later, she called me crying, and she said, I realize I sacrificed you. And I was kind of horrified. But she said, where was I going to go with 3 children? And I certainly knew he almost killed you. I knew the violence. I don't know that I consciously knew that he was sexually abusing you, but there was part of me that actually gave you over to him in a way to keep our economic situation. And as horrifying as that was, I don't think that's that unusual. I think there are many situations. I mean, I just remember being in Afghanistan and being with a family once where the daughter had been sold, you know, so that the family could keep living. And this is something that happens everywhere in the world. We're constantly sacrificing our daughters. We're constantly giving them up in order to maintain some kind of economic security. And I think this is something that has to be deeply examined and looked at. But I will say, as my mother got older and we really began to just unpack all of this and look at all of this between us, she had to then look into her own life and see that she had been sexually abused. And she had gone through her own process where she had not examined that or looked at that. So there's a way we also pass this on and pass this on until it gets broken in a family cycle.
But I think that, you know, and that what you said about sacrificing girls or sacrificing women is very important. And I think that I want to take a moment here in this room for each of us to consider moments where we sacrificed someone. An extended family member we knew was in an abusive marriage, but we didn't want to get involved. A neighbor we could hear was getting battered, but we didn't want to get involved. A colleague we knew was being sexually harassed, but don't want to mess that situation up, don't want to take on that guy. I think, I mean, in bus stops, in nightclubs, in bars, we have seen women in difficult situations. And if we have ever chosen to walk away, we've sacrificed one of our own to abuse, to that abuser, to that bully, or whoever that other person is. And I think this is important because at some point we have to consider our perhaps collective responsibility as society for each other. Because everybody turns around and asks a battered or an abused woman why you don't leave. But the truth is, how many of us are there to catch that person when they leave?
I think that's so true, and it was interesting. Yesterday, I was in Delhi at the Miranda House talking to young students about this, and men were really asking me, and really earnestly, and it was really wonderful to see, what can we do? And I was saying, you know, I travel the world, and I never meet, all the men I meet are the men who aren't abusing anyone, which is really amazing, seeing that 1 billion women in the world have been raped or battered. Somebody's doing it.
One really busy chap.
Yeah, it's one busy guy. And I said to them, if you are not abusing women, if you're not raping them, if you're not demeaning them, if you're not grabbing them on the streets or on the buses or on the... are you really standing up when you see it being done? Are you speaking to your uncles or your fathers or your brothers or your friends when you hear them degrading women or saying terrible things about them? Are you really breaking the male code? You know, in the book, my father says to me, and when it came out, because sometimes I really don't know who wrote this book, to be honest with you. I think we have a really remarkable...
Don't let your publisher hear you say that.
I know. But I think we have a remarkable relationship with the dead. And the dead are all around us. And I really felt my father's presence through this book very deeply. But he said to me at one point, to be an apologist is to be a traitor to men. And it really hit me. He said, once one man says he's sorry and admits that he knows what he was doing was wrong, the whole story of patriarchy begins to crumble. And I think in a way that's really true. I think the non-apology is holding up. It's one of the columns of patriarchy, right? And I think what we have to do now is invite men to be proud gender traitors and to come out and be the ones who are going to lead the way, just like the early feminists did in breaking out of a paradigm and a mindset that we are completely caught in right now.
Do you think that, and what you say about the apology, given this format of apology, let's assume in an ideal world all apologies sound like this going forward, it would also require for men to acknowledge weakness, vulnerability, guilt, the fact that you allowed temptation to take over. Is that perhaps the root of patriarchy? Because right now the way it works is that you are not a human being, you're a thing, you're property that I own and hence can do with as I please, whether that's a daughter or a wife or a colleague or whoever that is. So to sort of take away the individuality of a woman. Is the vulnerability part of that, needed to be part of that apology?
Critical. I think that an apology is a humbling. It's a becoming vulnerable. And if I can just say a few, I kind of learned like the architecture of an apology. I think it is a sacred act. I think it is a sacred act. I mean, we teach our children how to pray. We teach them the constancy of prayer. We teach them the devotion of prayer. We teach our girls how to apologize. I don't know any woman who doesn't say I'm sorry all the time. But we don't teach our boys how to apologize. And an apology is a very specific thing, and it's deep, and it involves self-interrogation, and I would say there are 4 parts to it. The first part is really looking into your childhood and looking into yourself and asking yourself, what were the ingredients that went into making me the kind of man who is capable of rape, of battery, of incest? What was my childhood? Was I sexually abused? Was I told, like my father, I mean, something I really learned in this book. My father was born long after the last child in his family. He was 15 years after. And so he was the accident that became the miracle. He was the divine right of kings. He was the golden boy. He was the one everyone worshipped. And I know, I've been in India long, coming back and forth enough to know that the boys in India are adored, where the girls are seen as second-class citizens at best. And I think one of the things my father taught me in this book is that adoration is not love. Adoration is a projection of someone's self-idealized image onto you, which you were then mandated to live up to, and being really enforced in some ways to give up your humanity. It means you can't be tender. It means you can't be vulnerable. You can't show weakness. You can't cry. You can't feel, really. You just have to live this kind of incredible idea of yourself that doesn't really include your humanity. So I think the first tenet of an apology is what created you, what made you, what went into it in your culture, in the society. What about patriarchy? I mean, the combination of not being able to feel as a man combined with privilege and power is a really deadly combination. And then the second tenet is, what did I do? What is a detailed accounting of what I did? Because I think the liberation is in the details. You have to say this, it's not, I'm sorry if I hurt you, I'm sorry if I abused you. It's, I'm sorry that I banged your head against the wall for an hour. I'm sorry that I came into your room at 5 years old and took your underpants off. It's really in the detailed accounting. And part of that detailed accounting is, what was my intention? What did I mean to do to you? Did I mean to reduce you? Did I see you as something so powerful and beautiful that I couldn't handle it, so I had to erase it? And then the third part is, what did my victim feel when I was doing what I did to her? What was happening in her body? What was happening in her mind? Did I break her heart? Did she feel betrayed? Did she leave her body? What was the long-term impact on her life? Was she then able to form relationships and intimacy, to really open your heart to feel what somebody felt? And then the last part, obviously, is taking responsibility and making amends. All of those steps indicating you've become someone who is not capable of doing something like this ever again.
Well, let's not sit in complete silence when we talk about our society and pretend we don't know what the Mera Raja Beta syndrome is in India. We call it the MRB syndrome, where Indian moms believe that their sons have fallen from the sky. And there's actually a saying, so you shouldn't count the number of chapatis that the boys eat. And we have now an endemic problem in India where our children, 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 5 children in India are underweight and more likely to die of diarrhea because they're feeding the boys more than the girls. And so young girls are giving birth, they're anemic, they're underweight, and they're giving birth to weak babies. And it's all part of this larger system. And in this gilded vagina of a room where we have all of South Mumbai that's gathered, let's also not pretend that this doesn't happen in our homes. And this is not something that's saved for rural India. It happens in every one of our homes. But I want to just step out to the larger picture here. In America, the President of the United States is a man who has been accused not by 1 or 2, but 40 women
40.
of abuse. Clear accounts, their names are public. We know who these women are. We know what they say. We have recordings of what he has said, and he is still the leader of that country. Where does that leave the battle and the patriarchy?
Well, that's a very good question. Do you know, building up to the election, I had such a scary, I've battled with our predator-in-chief for probably over the last, 20 some odd years of my life. I refuse to use his name, and I haven't since the election because he loves it so much. But I will say that when the tape came out, the Grab the Pussy tape, I really believed in my heart of hearts that would be it. I really did. And when that wasn't it, it began to signal to me that there was something going on that none of us could have ever imagined. And then when one after woman after woman after woman began to come out to talk about the rapes and the harassment and being raped in, changing rooms at department stores, and I feel like there is something happening in the world, not only in America, but throughout the world, whether we look at Duterte or Modi or Bolsonaro or Putin. We are living in this strongman, machismo, fascist era. And misogyny and the absolute desecration of women is completely connected to that paradigm. And I think what's really terrifying is to see how, over the course of this time of the last 3 devastating years in America, this diabolical reign of this narcissistic predator, we have absolutely seen how women now, the level of violence is rising in our country, the level of, you just have a look in any quarter, whether it's migrant rapes, whether it's rapes of women at jobs, whether it's absolutely escalated because he is in that powerful position. Not to mention the level of racism, xenophobia, and we can just go on, and destruction of the planet Earth that he is wreaking on us,
Well, the truth is, and it's happening here in India as well, where all communication has now been divided into us versus them. The celebration of this sort of masculine idea of "Ghar mein ghus ke marenge," where that we're willing to take revenge and we're willing to take what's ours and all of this, has also in some way attacked the idea of feminism, the idea of equal rights, the idea of gender justice. Therefore, somehow, if you're asking for gender justice, you're against us in some way. And do you believe that maybe in the last 5 years or 3 years in America has set us back a great deal?
Well, I think, I always wonder why and how this predator has come to power. And I'm sure you must wonder the same thing here. I think, I'm sorry, but I have to say it.
I like this sort of nervous laughter. So let me remind you guys, you are in a dark room. If you laugh and clap, nobody knows it's you. So go ahead.
But I sometimes wonder how much of what is happening is a backlash against how far women are coming, and how far people of color in America were beginning to come, and how far, there are so many things that we're beginning to change. And I think sometimes I dream this is the last gasp of the patriarchal, capitalist, fascist dragon, like we're in it. But we know that last gasps can be deadly. You know, like they can be that final thing where they put out the lights of the world if we're not careful. And what I do know right now is, you know, I was talking earlier to the press, and I was saying that one of the tactics I always thought living in my family is kind of living in a kind of fascist reality. You know, my father had all the power. My mother was, or a corporation, and sometimes there's parallels. You know, my father was the CEO, my mother was at best his executive secretaries, and we were the unpaid labor who were exploited constantly, you know. And one of the tactics my father used, and we're seeing this also play out across the world with all these strongman leaders, is the divide and conquer tactic, right? You know, that he was constantly, my brother was good one day, I was bad, then that day my sister was good, so we were constantly put up against each other, sort of the way this country and our country is being divided between migrants, immigrants. Suddenly there's bad immigrants and good immigrants. Suddenly there's people who are welcome here and people who aren't welcome here. I think
we call them anti-nationals.
Yes.
So anyone who has a question in this country is an anti-national.
Right, exactly. And that's not dissimilar to our country. You know, I think they all go to the same school. I think they meet. There's the playbook that they're all playing out of. They have regular meetings at Trump's, you know, Mar-a-Lago, and they just go, okay, let's move it around. You know, but I also think one of the ways we can fight back is by refusing these divisions. You know, by standing up for Muslims, by standing up for Adivasis, by standing up for Dalits. In our country, standing up for people who are coming over our borders, not letting them divide us. You know, this is the critical thing, and I think what happens is there is so much fear engendered. You know, and that fear is so, okay, it may be real, but what I've learned is when you bark back, it often dissipates. And when many bark back, they don't hold the power. And so part of what the tactics is to isolate us and to make us feel like we are alone. We are not alone. We are the many in every single country where this is going on. We are the many. And it is so important we remember that, because it's so easy, like in my own family, I became isolated. I became alone. I didn't think I had power. But it really, when I started to fight back, that's when everything began to change and the dynamics began to change. And even if I was being thrown against walls, I had my voice. I was there. I was present. I was alive, as opposed to being diminished in my silence, you know?
And that's so important. And I just want to point out how reluctant you all were about 10 minutes ago to just applaud. And that's the kind of fear and nervousness that we have never known in this country. Never. I mean, we're a country that lived through the emergency. And we won. So, and I find also, if I may just steal a moment, I find that on social media and on Twitter and all of these places, the intelligent, well-informed people who know better are backing away to the corner saying, you know what, I'm not going to say anything anymore. And the more of us who back away in silence, the quieter the intelligence will become, and that's a very dangerous thing. If, you know, we live in a country where our constitution gives us equal rights, which means that we are equal irrespective of our religion and our caste and our gender and our sexual orientation and who we choose to love and what we choose to worship and what we choose to eat. And we know that. We were taught this in the 4th standard, but none of us are willing to say it anymore. And it boils down to just that. They just stand up and say no. And I want to point out to you today, it's the same question we constantly ask abuse victims. Why didn't you say no?
Exactly.
Did you not say no loud enough? Didn't you walk away? Didn't you have the ability to stop this person? Why won't you say no today? You know better. And the idea that what's happening in families of abuse is perhaps also mirroring into what's happening in our countries today is something that I think we could all take away tonight from this.
Well, you know, there's a wonderful writer named Alice Miller, and she did fantastic writings about Germany and the seeds of how Hitler came to power. And she did a lot of writings on authoritarianism and punishment and basically robbing children of any rights at a very young age, so they were always looking up to authority and never speaking back to it. But, you know, I also read this book recently where it's a guy named, I think, Robert Hafner, about, it was just he was a German bourgeois journalist who talked about the rise of Nazism. And he said there were 3 tenets of it. One was that nobody really believed it was happening, so they just didn't respond to it. 2, no one wanted to give up their comforts. And 3, the left was divided. And I think, is there any country where that's not happening right now? And I think part of what I really believe is a response is everything you're saying, is that once somebody breaks the silence and says, I don't agree with this and this isn't true and I'm going to fight, people can begin to have courage and people have to join that person so that person isn't left out there to dry. And we have to build more and more and more resistance to this wave. It is a wave of fascist darkness that is circulating the planet right now. I mean, I just did an event a few weeks ago with these beautiful activists and Caetano Velosa and a Brazilian, the leader of the Brazilian indigenous movement fighting to save the Amazon. And they were just talking about Bolsonaro and how quickly Brazil changed underneath him so that the forests are now being desecrated, you know. And I think it's just, you just give people an inch and they begin to go and they begin to go and and we have to resist that if we're going to stay alive as a human species, because the earth will be destroyed. It won't be here anymore.
And you know, specifically with Brazil, the patterns are so similar because here you have, you know, there's a justification of, oh, who's France to tell me what to do? Where are France's forests? You know, this happens every year. What is Brazil supposed to eat? And the changing of the twisting of the narrative, the gaslighting of the details of this happens all the time. This is not unusual. What are you complaining about? We cut 3,000 trees in RA because you don't know what you're talking about, because journalists are making stuff up, because these trees had a death wish. I don't know, they had all kinds of justifications of why they needed to do what they did, and they've just basically made all activists anti-development, anti-people, anti-government, anti-national. It is, at the end of the day, the patterns are very similar.
Yeah, I'll give you a very good example of that, the gaslighting thing. I think if I look at our predator, one of the things he's really good about within 2 minutes is reversing and becoming the victim when he's just been the perpetrator, right? I mean, it's just genius. You're just like, what? What just happened? What just happened? You're going to put out the documents that show your corruption? Okay, that is just, but my father used to do this really bizarre thing. He would beat me up, right? And in the morning, I'd be at breakfast with bruises on my neck. And he would say to my mother, what happened to her? What happened to her? And my mother would not tell him what he had done. Now, that is so similar to what is happening right now. There's like this veil. We will not break to tell the truth to the person who is destroying our world. You know, and we learn that at a very young age. Don't tell your father, don't make your father feel bad about how much he's hurt you. Don't make your father feel bad that he's raped you. Don't make your uncle feel bad when he's destroyed you. This is a pathology that we all have to get brave about and saying, no, actually you did that. Actually, that happened. I'm not a crazy person, right? But I think the people who are very good at this start making us think, wait, did that really happen? You know, I mean, I think they counted at how many lies the predator had told over the last 3 years, and it was thousands of lies that go on every day, and you start to be like, whoa, you know, what is true? And that's part of the strategy. It's part of the strategy, you know?
And I just want you guys to respond with a yes. And I want to ask you today, are we ready to stand up to abuse?
That was meek.
Yeah. I'll ask again. Are we ready to stand up to abuse?
Yes. Okay, that was good.
Are we ready to stick up for people around us who are being abused? Yes. Are we ready to speak up in the face of injustice? Yes. Are we ready to call out the lies? Yes. All right. All right. The lights are coming on because we want to open this up for some questions. I have a couple of requests. Make sure they're questions and not comments. As far as possible, let's stay in the area of the book. But you can ask other questions if you want to. And let's try and keep them short so we can get as many people in as we can. Before we open that up, I can see Mamadou Modi Kotpal sitting there, who put up the Vagina monologues for us in India for...
Stand up, please,
yes,
and
let's give her a round of
Kaizad.
applause, ladies, gentlemen.
Please.
Yes, Asad is there as well.
I just want to say they are just pioneers of vaginas in India, and they have really done such extraordinary work keeping this play alive and fighting off so many battles. I honor you and I love you so much. Thank you.
We clap with our hands, but our vaginas thank you. Oh, Dolly Thakur, please stand up.
Dolly's here. Dolly!
All right, let's get some questions in. Just raise your hand if you have a question. I see a couple of young ladies, second row from the back, near the aisle, please. Gentlemen, please raise your hands. As you know, I'm extremely partial to the women, so you would have to fight for your rights in here.
Hi, do you need me to stand up or can I sit?
Would you please, so the audience can see you?
Hi, so my name is Sangeeta Wadhwani. I'm the executive editor at Hello Magazine, and it was lovely to hear you, and it was beautiful to hear Rahul's bringing to life your experience in the letter of apology. When I heard Rahul coming into your father's mind and then saying, I destroyed you, I've destroyed your ability to have boundaries, to defend yourself, I have destroyed your capacity to enjoy the normal and the ordinary. And I see you today as one of the most fulfilled and most focused people that I know in the writing space. I just wonder how you had evolved into this, coming from a space of so much pain and so much abuse.
Thank you. That's a really good question, and it's taken a long time. I'm old, you know. I think there's several things that have really helped me. One is imagination, because I think it's our superpower. You know, I think I even as a child, I had this ability to fantasize this future that was coming. I used to have an imaginary friend. Can I tell you this little story? I had this imaginary friend named Mr. Alligator, and every time my father would beat me up or do something terrible to me, I would go and I would dial. We had rotary dial phones. That's how old I am in those days. And I would say, hi, Mr. Alligator, will you please come and get me? And then I would pack my bag. I'd put an orange in it and some crayons. And I'd go and I'd walk down this little walkway. And I'd sit and I'd wait all day for Mr. Alligator to come. And I knew that he was busy because there were a lot of other really tortured children. So I knew some days, you know, he just didn't get to me. But I knew he was coming. And everyone made fun of me and my family. And of course, they thought I was crazy and all of that. Okay, I did this all the time. But I want to cut to 40 years later. I had the honor of being part of opening our first V-Day safe house in Kenya with an extraordinary woman named Agnes Pareo, who I met and who had been cut. She had been female genitally mutilated when she was a child. And she had been walking through the Rift Valley for many years with the Maasai community. She had like a box, and it had a vagina in it and vagina parts. And she taught people in the Maasai community what a mutilated vagina looked like and what a well one. And as she walked, she began to change people's minds about excision and the devastation of the process. And when I met her, I fell in love with her. And I just said, what could we do for you in V-Day? And she said, well, if you got me a Jeep, I could get around a lot faster. So, because she'd been walking through the Rift Valley. So we bought her a Jeep, and she saved 1,500 girls in that year. And then we said, what else? And she said, well, if you got, it was amazing. And then she said, well, if you gave me money, I could open a house, because we now have laws in Kenya that prevent female FGM. And so when we went for the opening of the house, it was this amazing moment. And we drove up, and there were all these girls in red, the color of V-Day and the color of the Maasai, dancing and drumming and singing. And it was just so powerful. I couldn't even get out of the car. I was crying so hard. And when I got out of the car, they started leading me down this path, and it was the exact same stone as the pathway I had walked as a child to wait for Mr. Alligator. And I realized that he had come. Mr. Alligator had come. It had taken him a few years, but he had shown up. So I think there is something so powerful about art and imagination, and resistance is in our imagination. And I think the other thing is fighting for other people. You know, when we give what we want the most to other people, we heal the broken parts inside. And I think that's what activism is. It's getting out of your own suffering and pain and finding somebody who's just a little worse off than you, who you can help lift up. And of course, there's been massive therapy and dancing and yoga and everything I possibly could to transform my body. The process recovering from violence is arduous. It's painful. And one of the reasons I fight so hard is I think girls should be born with the right to thrive rather than survive, to have their hearts and bodies and vaginas and spirits intact, because girls are so powerful and so intuitive and so imaginative, and they have so many answers that we need on this planet right now. And when we destroy them, we destroy our future. So we need to stop doing it.
I see you, but the gentleman with the checked shirt and the very impressive beard.
My name is also Rahul, and I'm a journalist, have been all my career. I'm going to ask a question to you which is not going to make me very popular with the largely female audience here. And the question is, I'm going to talk a little, just mention a little bit of background. In McDonald's, you might have heard that there was a gentleman who was fired just recently because he had a consensual relationship with another employee. But simply because he was senior to her, he was fired and he accepted it. My question to you is the Me Too movement killing romance in the workplace or not?
Romance in the workplace?
Yes. Is it killing? Because in the 60s and 70s in the West, you know, people used to meet each other usually and get married when they were in school or college or wherever it was. But there was not, and then in the 60s and 70s, a lot of people, women started going to work. And they would meet men in the workplace and they would get married. It's happening in India now. But is the Me Too movement killing that?
I'm going to let you answer that.
Right. So first of all, Rahul, if I may call you that.
Yes.
There should be no romance in the workplace.
There should be.
There shouldn't be. There should be no romance in the workplace because guess what? Women are going there to work. You can find us on Tinder if you want to. But, and I believe this very strongly, I believe the feminist movement, of which Me Too is now a part, is a living, breathing thing that evolves with every generation, because every generation of women fight for something and then hand it over and the next generation takes it forward. Our grandmothers fought to finish studying. I had a grandmother who was a math genius. She was married at the age of 17 and she had 11 children. She didn't get a chance to finish her 12th standard. Our mother's generation fought to work. My generation fought to have careers, which is that we're not going to just be secretaries and teachers and air hostesses. We want careers that define us. We want careers that make us seem selfish because we're doing it for us. We're not doing it to support the family financially. But today the fight is for choices. The fight is for the choice to be a single working woman, to be a working mom, to be a stay-home mom, to be a woman with a live-in partner, to be a woman with a husband, to be a woman with a husband and no children, to be a woman with a husband and 4 children, to be a woman who doesn't go to PTA meetings, to be a woman who does go to PTA meetings, to be a woman who expects her husband to do more than make omelets on Sunday morning and to actually change diapers. These are our choices, and we want to be taken seriously for those choices. Now, to come back to why I'm telling you all of this is because we go to our workplaces to be taken seriously as professionals for our skills, for our intelligence, for our efficiency, not for our ability to spring romance. And if the Me Too movement has led to men feeling that they can no longer feel warm and fuzzy in the workplace, I'm okay with that, actually. Because if men cannot tell the difference between how you treat someone as a professional and how you keep the warm and fuzzy feelings outside of the workplace, then don't do it at all. No? Just don't touch her, yeah. So a lot of people have come up to me after this whole thing and said, dude, I don't know how to behave around women. Very simple. Don't touch her. Okay? At all. No pat on the back, no ruffling the hair, nothing. Just don't touch her. Don't comment on how she looks. Treat her exactly as if she were a guy.
But what if it is consensual?
Okay. If it is consensual and it's against the company policy of McDonald's to have consensual relationships with other employees, then don't do it. He was the CEO. And okay, so I also want to point this out, and there's a lot of times where people say that, oh, you know, just because he was senior, when you are a person of power, you are the CEO, you're the CFO, you're the team manager, you have the ability to give promotions, you have the ability to take away jobs, you have the ability to throw someone off a project. That is no longer consensual. Because for a 20-year-old woman, or a 25-year-old woman who cannot say no to you. Because you will have her fired, you will give her a bad record, you will throw her off a project, you will tell other people in your big boy boardrooms that this person can't be trusted, yeah, or whatever else goes on in these rooms. It is not consensual if you are not equals, because the other person doesn't have the ability to give you consent. There was someone who waved both hands. Right in front of the sound console. Okay.
Hi, Eve. I'm a big fan of yours. My name is Kitu Gidwani. I'm an actress.
We all love you.
I watch YouTube every night and I get all my news from YouTube. Because I watch only alternative news. And I have been totally shocked following the Jeffrey Epstein story in the US. And the revelations that are coming out as to how he abused thousands of young girls, and he had enablers who were women as well as men, and that he had powerful men, and he would traffic these young girls to these powerful men all over the world, right? And now 1 or 2 of them have spoken out. And my question to you is, why are the women of America not speaking up and screaming at ABC, CBS, NBC, and all the mainstream media as to why they are throttling the story? Why are the women of America not standing up for all those abused girls? Because we know that the powerful men are being protected now that they killed Jeffrey Epstein in jail. Right? It's obvious they killed him because his neck was snapped. He couldn't have possibly just jumped off his bunk and snapped his neck, right? It was a massive thing. And more people are getting, and all the alternative media that I'm watching, and they're mainly American young people, one question that one of them asked was, where are the women of America and why are they not screaming for the blood of?
I think there are some women who are speaking up. I know my friend Kim Crenshaw just had a huge gathering last night, or maybe it's even tonight, about the Jeffrey Epstein. There are some. They're not being reported on mainstream media, right? But I think right now in America, it is a very strange period that we're living in. We have a president, as she said, right, who has 40 counts of sexual abuse against him, and nothing is happening. So it's like, who are we screaming to, right? There's a real question. And it's sort of like you look at the president a week after he was elected, the predator, a week after he was elected, 5 million people, 5 million women marched around the world. And a day later, he passed the gag rule, the global gag rule. So there is a sense right now of like speaking into a void, do you know? And that's not to justify silence, but I think there's so many different cases. The Harvey Weinstein case, I mean, we're being, I mean, there is so much happening right now. So I'm not justifying it. I think it's also just overload right now, you know?
All right, I'll take one quick question. Yes, the young lady right in front here, please.
Hi.
Good evening.
I'm Prachi, and I'm doing a PhD in neuroscience. My question to you, I hope it's not a very painful question when I ask this. If that apology had been real to you, if you didn't have to write it, if it would have come in time, how would you have responded to it?
Well, today, if my father had written that apology, the one I wrote, I really believe that the tentacles of rancor and bitterness and hate and betrayal would have dissolved. I do. I really believe that. And I will tell you something really interesting. This exercise of writing a letter to yourself from your perpetrator is a very, very powerful thing. We're actually at City of Joy. We have an amazing sanctuary and a revolutionary center in the Congo that we opened 8 years ago for women who have been sexually terrorized in the war. And they started doing this exercise where there's 90 women every 6 months, and they all were offered the option to write letters from their perpetrators. And they're so obsessed with doing it. My director told me that every day there's piles of letters at her front door when she comes in. I think it's a really amazing exercise to do. I wouldn't do it alone. I would do it with support from a therapist, from clergy, from counselor. But there's something about writing your way out of a story that you were in. When I began the book, my father was a monster. At the end, he was an apologist. At the beginning, he was a terrifying entity. At the end, he was a broken little boy. And by writing this, I got agency over my story. Because the imagination is so powerful. You know, so I feel if men are willing to go through the process that I've outlined, that my father went through in this book, I don't necessarily believe in forgiveness. I think it's often mandated by the church or religions or whatever, you know, this kind of forced forgiveness. You must forgive your perpetrator. I don't believe that. I don't think the onus of forgiveness is ever on the victim, ever. But what I will say is when someone makes a true, deep, profound apology, the tentacles of rancor and bitterness and hate release. And that is the closest I know to forgiveness. And my father is gone. My father is gone. At the end of this book, when he says, "Old man, be gone," it was like Peter Pan. Remember at the end when Tinkerbell goes, shoo? That's what happened at the end of this book. My father went, shoo, and he went back to another realm. I believe it's a better realm, but he is now gone. So I think there are practices we can do, and I just want to say one last thing to survivors. You know, we're told we get raped, we get abused, we get done, and then we're told we're broken for life. We're ruined for life. This is not true. And that's the second rape, is to believe that you're a ruined person. We can get through. We can change. We can transform. We can get back into our bodies. And I will tell you that women who have passed through that wound are the strongest, most powerful women on this planet. And the future belongs to us. That's all I have to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, Eve Ensler.
The future belongs to us, and I think that's what we are all going to take away today. But before thanking both of them for this fantastic conversation, which has just taken the book and at many different levels, I just want to also say that this conversation is just the beginning, and we are kind of launching the 2020 1 Billion Rising campaign, which is taking the conversation on gender justice together forward and to come and celebrate it together. I'm going to invite Monique Wilson, who is a global coordinator from Philippines. She's come all the way for this event. And Abha Bhaiya, who is the coordinator from India, to join us on the stage. Monique and Abha. And may I invite Rahul, Nandita, Gandhi, and Asad. And we are all going to do together, put together the apology and what it's going to mean for all of us.
Okay, we're going to see a video too, all right? Okay, so this event would never have been possible if Eve Ensler had not written the book and she had not come to India, and she's as provocative and political with humor and passion as she is. So we have to give her a big hand. Thanks to Rahul Bose, fantastic reading with so much of emotion, superb diction. We have to thank him too. Faye D'Souza is, of course, an ace interviewer. She gave another demonstration. All the experience with politicians came out over here really well. So thank you so for willingly accepting our request to do this session and conversation. We wouldn't be standing here on this stage if not for the Royal Opera House. We would like to thank the Maharaja, Shri Jyotindra Singh Ji, and of Gondal, and Maharani Sahiba, Kumud Kumari of Gondal. We have the Honorary Director, Ashish Doshi, and the Curator, who you all know, Asad Lalljee. Monique Wilson from OBR got this whole process going. Abha Bhaiya is the coordinator of India. You just met her, close friend who supported us all through. Akshara would not have managed without Geeta Rao, our media consultant who has gone so much beyond her role, handheld us, advised us through this entire process and made this such a smooth thing. Bhargavi Joshi has designed the startling photos you see outside, thanks to the sound, light, and projector people of Royal Opera House. The tea and snacks, which you can have if you go out, is the Sophia College canteen. And lastly, all the young people and the old people you see around with little badges, our Akshara team, and also our board members who are here in force. Thank you very much for being here for us.